Hello, Waterloo Region. You're listening to Meet the Candidate on CKMS-FM 102.7 Radio Waterloo. My name is Bob Jonkman. In this episode, we meet Ethan Russell, the Green Party candidate for Kitchener South Hespeler. In Meet the Candidate, Radio Waterloo provides 25 minutes of free airtime to Waterloo Region candidates running in the 2025 federal election. This is not an interview, but 25 minutes of unstructured time. Candidates could tell you about their platform, the local Waterloo Region issues they'll be tackling, why they're running, or what they do outside of politics. Note that the views expressed are not necessarily those of the Radio Waterloo Board of Directors, volunteers, sponsors, or advertisers. Now let's meet the candidate, Ethan Russell.
Hi, thank you so much, Bob. It's great that you had me on here today. This is actually probably going to be the first actual radio show appearance that I've had of my time as a politician, so that is very exciting. And I'm very thankful to everybody who's listening in today or watching on YouTube. It's great to have you. So over this past month, roughly, I've been running for office here in Kitchener South Hespeler as the Green Party candidate. But I've been involved in politics for quite a while now. I remember back in 2019, right at the precipice in grade 10, Doug Ford had only been elected only about a year ago, and I took part in my very first ever protest. We walked out. Doug Ford was making massive cuts to education. And in that moment, I knew that this was something that I had to keep on doing. The problems that we were protesting back in 2019, they haven't ended. They have continued, they have persisted, and in a lot of ways, they've only gotten worse. And now, at this moment, I feel like it's more important than ever that we say that we've had enough, that we need a change, and that we need to pivot. I hear a lot of the times the Conservative candidates talking about the past 10 years of Liberal governance. And there's a lot of criticisms that they have that they're very right about. In these past 10 years, people like Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party more generally have failed to meet a lot of the crises that we've been faced with. But so have the Conservatives. Again, my very first time ever really engaging in politics was against a Conservative government. I think we can take a step back and we can say this is not a simple issue with just Justin Trudeau or just Mark Carney. This is an issue with just Pierre Poilievre or just Stephen Harper. This is a systemic, structural issue that we have been having for years and years and years. When I'm on that debate stage, I talk about the history of this country and the problems that we have faced. And we can stretch some of these problems, like the housing crisis, all the way back to people like Brian Mulroney. Now, I personally am a very young person. I am a 21-year-old college student. I actually just finished up with my finals last week. Had 2 exams and then a debate. It's been a stressful time for students. Housing crisis is killing us. It is. I have had to live with my parents for the past 21 years. I have never had the experience of moving house for the very simple reason that there's nowhere to go. I have met people who simply have to try and cram themselves into spaces, 5 people in a 1-bedroom apartment, just to find something. This is completely unacceptable. And again, this is a problem that persists beyond just the Liberal government or a Conservative government. This is an issue that is structural on every single level of government. And we need people who are going to make the real change to see it happen. And I think at the end of the day, that is why I'm running. I've seen people like Mike Morris put in the work, put in the time, put in the effort, put in the energy to get real change through. And again, as a student, as a young person, that's really impactful. And I think that the Green Party is the only party to me that is meeting those needs. I have some friends and family who are on disability. I have a good friend of mine who's on ODSP, and my grandfather has been on ODSP for longer than I've been alive. These people can't do anything about that. They're not failures, they're not rejects, they're not people who just don't want to work. They're people who are struggling who need the extra support. So when the Liberal government announced that they were going to give a federal disability benefit, I was very excited. Finally the chance to bring these people out of legislative poverty and into real society. My grandfather has been living off of ODSP, again, for longer than I've been alive. He makes some of the lowest money in my family. But for a very long time, he was also one of my caregivers. When my parents were at work, he is the one who would take care of me and my sister. And yet, here he is, living off of pitiful cash. But when the Liberal government finally did introduce their bill to pass the Canada Disability Benefit, it failed. It was nothing. It was $200 a month, maybe. But then I saw Mike Morris, and you know what Mike Morris did? He fought to get it better. Now, sadly, it still isn't great. We're still fighting the hard fight. But in this moment, where we're staring down the barrel of a gun that is the Conservative government, and we see Mike Carney here, and we see polls and projections saying that he could get upwards of 190 seats. I think and I ask, if we couldn't trust the Trudeau government to do things like the Canada Disability Benefit, $10 a day childcare, affordable housing, dealing with the climate crisis, if we couldn't trust them to do it correctly, how can we trust Carney to do it correctly? And I think at the end of the day, we can't. I can personally recognize that the Greens are probably not going to form government this election, but that doesn't mean that we don't have power. Mike Morris has done more to get that Canada Disability Benefit to where it is now than any Liberal MP has. And I cannot even begin to imagine the power that would come with 3 Green seats, maybe even 4 or 5. And I think that, at the end of the day, is really what pushes me with this party. We have the ability to make change. We have the ability to do what is right by the people. We aren't just going to sit around and say, hey, we hear you. We'll maybe throw you a few cents here and there. We'll maybe give you a tax credit here, maybe a tax cut there. But at the end of the day, we're just going to kind of mosey along and pretend like nothing is happening. But at the other end, we see a party in the Conservatives that have put such a fear into so many, that has put the fear into so many people that I love. And I don't believe that we can accept that. The Conservatives have continuously imported American cultural warfare into this country in a way that I just don't believe is acceptable. And I don't believe that just simply because we can recognize the failures of the past 10 years of Liberal governments means that we need to turn around and accept American cultural imports in the Conservative Party. I think that what we need is that we need people who are going to fight for our community. We need people who are going to fight for us. We need people who are going to fight for you. And I only really think that is going to come from the Green Party. I have been studying early childhood education for the past few years now, and that has given me a very interesting insight. In my time studying this, I have met educators who are struggling. When you think of childcare, you might think of, nannies, old grandmothers who are taking care of their children, but when you work in the field, you see something very different. You see so many young people, especially young women, who are just trying to get by. And the major problem that the early childhood education field right now is suffering from is a constant ignore cycle. We see things like the $10 a day childcare that the Liberals passed. That is a godsend to ECEs. But then it only gives half measures. It doesn't give nearly enough funding for the things that need to happen. It doesn't give nearly enough time. It doesn't give nearly enough money to make sure that educators are paid well, that children are fed, taken care of, that centers have enough money to keep themselves open. But then if you don't go on $10 a day, well then your center loses all of its families to centers that are on $10 a day. And this is the problem. For so long, ECEs were ignored. And then we were listened to because parents wanted affordable childcare. A very, very reasonable expectation. But then, once we got it, we went back to being ignored again. All of the problems, all of the alarms that we are raising with this program aren't being listened to by the Liberal government. But that's something that I want to bring to the table. I want to bring ECEs directly to the table so that we can finally have a say in how we are governed. But on the other side, I've also met parents who are struggling. I've met parents who are trying to simultaneously go through college and take care of a 3-year-old. I have met parents who are, by and large, just ordinary run-of-the-mill parents, except for the fact that one parent has a job in Toronto that they normally do, online, asynchronous, but sometimes they have to go to the office. How do they handle if all of a sudden, emergency, they have to go to the office, but they have a child at home? I may be young, but I've seen so many struggles from parents that tell me exactly what this country needs more of. There are these issues, things like childcare, that I feel the past few governments, not just Liberal, not just Conservative, have routinely just given poultry to. They've just given slices, just like a little bit here, a little bit there. Enough to calm people down, but never enough to truly do good. Repeatedly, this is what we see over and over and over. Enough to calm you down, but never enough to satisfy you. Enough to make you stop talking about it, but never enough to make it go away. This is the kind of politics that I simply want to see stopped. It's felt like for my entire life, it's been nothing more than crumbs here and there, and then occasionally one big policy that really doesn't mean a whole lot. I remember when I was 17 years old, it was the 2021 federal election. I had just finished high school, and I was trying to figure out where I wanted to go from there. And then, at the door, comes Valerie Redford, the current Liberal MP for Kitchener South Hespeler. Getting a moment to talk with her was an excellent experience, and it is something that I will always remember. And I'm always glad to see politicians, especially Liberal and Conservative ones, coming to the door who are willing to talk with anybody, even a 17-year-old who couldn't legally even vote. In that, however, she said some things that really stuck with me. Some things that even I, as a canvasser who is now going door to door, will never remember, but I will also never forget. I remember her telling me just how much the Liberal government cared about climate change, just how much they were fighting to ensure that young people like myself had a future, that we had a habitable planet that we could live on forever and ever. What happened? I haven't seen that planet. The Liberal government seems to be throwing, again, crumbs at us, trying to get us to stop talking about climate change or make it seem like they're dealing with the climate crisis when really they're not. They gave us the consumer carbon tax, and that was about it. They taxed us for our carbon and then used that to pay for billions of dollars in subsidies to oil and gas and to buy new pipelines. That doesn't sound like caring about the climate crisis to me. I know in a lot of ways, climate change is something that has fell to the back burner. That in a moment of, affordability crises, at a time in which housing costs have boomed through the roof, at a time when it feels like grocery prices are ballooning out of control, things like climate change fall to the back burner. But I don't think we should stop talking about it. I think we should continue to talk about the fact that the Liberal government have failed to properly recognize the crisis. They've failed to provide concrete plans on how to solve it, and the concrete plans that they have given, they've fallen behind on. This, I feel, as a young person, as somebody who grew up through the climate protests of 2018 and 2019, find just plainly unacceptable. I must ask, where is that care? Again, they introduced the consumer carbon tax and then took it away, but then used the money from that consumer carbon tax almost to pay for billions of dollars in subsidies, billions of dollars in pipelines, billions of dollars in new oil and gas starts. But there's nothing, almost nothing, for all of the other industries that Canada thrives on. Now, I would like to dispel one myth. One myth that the Green Party is against fully any energy that isn't 100% solar and wind, and that we are completely against any sort of resource extraction. That is not true. I, for one, firmly believe that Canada can become an energy exporter, but that oil and gas is not going to save us. Instead, things like nuclear power or solar and wind, those are going to be the things that are going to thrive us. We have some of the biggest uranium exports in the world. However, we've recently fallen behind countries like Kazakhstan because the oil and gas sector don't want us mining uranium. This is not an environmentalist big concern of, oh no, uranium. This is because the oil and gas industry knows that if we move to uranium, that if we focus that as our main resource extraction, the oil and gas industry will collapse. If that will collapse them, then I say they may just want to collapse. We have clean energy solutions that we can home build here in this country that give good paying union jobs to people who need them. And we also know that countries around the world like France are investing more and more into nuclear power. So shouldn't Canada be one of the people who harness real clean renewable energy? Instead, we keep investing in old fossil fuels like oil and gas in ways that harm our ecosystem, harm our economy, and make us weaker overall. Perhaps you've seen the graph that in 2015, the Canadian per capita investments went down and they never went back up, and it's because of Trudeau. Well, really, the drop happened pre-Trudeau. The drop happened during Stephen Harper's administration, and the drop happened because oil and gas money fell. Why are we tying our economy to the most volatile element out there in oil and gas? You see moments like the pandemic where we get hit very hard because all of a sudden, oil is useless. Why are we tying ourselves to a dying industry? We can say, oh, well, if we end oil and gas, that's not going to stop America from extracting. It might not. But California has already set in stone that they're going to ban new gas-powered cars in the 2030s. And they're not the only place that is going to be doing this. This is going to happen more and more and more. We can have a proper, modern building economy. One of the things I love about Kitchener South Hespeler, and just the KW region in general, is how much of a tech hub it has become. I often hear the joke of Waterloo's biggest exports is UW Tech students. And you know what? Let's make it that. We have the blueprint for how a modern Canada can thrive. We are one of the fastest growing cities and economies in Canada. There's a reason for it. And it's not because we found oil down below City Hall and started drilling it. There are other industries that Canada can thrive on. We are not completely 100% tied to oil and gas. And I think that if we take the time to invest more in our tech sector or to invest more in other forms of resource extraction, we can thrive far better than Canada has ever thrived before. And even within other material extraction, a lot of the times we simply take things out of the ground and ship it away. You know, I hear people like Daniela Smith or Scott Moe, the premiers for Alberta and Saskatchewan, I hear them so often talk about this idea of how Trump will be so good for the Canadian economy because he loves oil. Well, sadly, he does love oil, but not our oil. He hates crude oil. He likes good refined oil, as he calls it. And that oil only comes from places like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Our oil, he hates it. And he hates pretty much everything, all the other resources that we send. We're not sending over planks of wood. We're sending over raw timber. We're not sending over furnished chairs and tables. We're sending over a tree that we just cut with the branches still on it. That isn't a modern economy. That is a rip and ship colony. At the end of the day, what we need to focus on is pushing ourselves to be a diverse, modern economy. Our platform as the Green Party will end rip and ship. And one of the biggest things that will come to is that will encourage manufacturing here in Canada. Countries like Sweden, who have a very similar lumber industry to us, does it in a very different way. Because first, they process their lumber. Yeah, sure, there are still some raw lumber exiting Sweden, but by and large, most of it is either as finished planks or as furnishing, chairs, tables, desks, things like that. And I mean, my father works in manufacturing. I know that KW used to have a very strong manufacturing industry, and we still have an industrial zone here in KW. I live not too far from it. We have the space here in this city to encourage that manufacturing industry. And there are places like Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta that are currently very reliant on oil and gas that we could probably de-rely on oil and gas by investing in this manufacturing industry. However, the oil and gas industry knows that if we do that, if we end rip and ship, if we all of a sudden push our focus to where this idea of Canada making things, keeping those things, and then selling those things in a way that is actually beneficial to us, well, the oil and gas industry loses out the most for that. They lose out on one of their biggest partnerships, which is ripping off the Canadian people for billions and billions of dollars. Every other party is beholden to that interest, to the interest of ripping you off. The Liberals and the Conservatives are, at the end of the day, the party of oil and gas. And the NDP feels beholden to maintain oil and gas, or else what do they have? We aren't beholden to that. We aren't beholden to a few rich aristocrats off sipping on their oil who don't even live in the country anymore. We are for you. We're here to build a modern, thriving economy, one that actually works. I hear so often from the conservatives and the PPC and the liberals that you can't have, a Canadian economy without oil. But then how do all the countries without oil survive? Why can't we be more like them? How does Waterloo? Again, we aren't a city that has a big oil field in the middle. We aren't a city with a thriving resource extraction economy. But we are one of the fastest growing ones. And I think that is what is so important to remember. The fact that we can do better. The fact that people across Canada can be more like Waterloo. And I think only a Waterloo MP is going to make that change. We already have Mike Morris, but I think we're going to need a hell of a lot more. And I think that can only come from a Green MP.
You've been listening to Ethan Russell, the Green Party candidate for Kitchener South Hespeler. The views expressed were those of the candidate, not necessarily those of the Radio Waterloo Board of Directors, volunteers, sponsors, or advertisers. All Waterloo Region candidates were invited to meet the candidate, but some candidates have declined to appear on the radio, and some have not responded at all. Remember, the election is on Monday, the 28th of April. Show notes, podcast, and video will be available shortly on the Radio Waterloo website at radiowaterloo.ca/MTC. This show is produced by me, Bob Jonkman, in the studios of CKMS-FM. The theme music is Falling Sky by Jason Shaw of Audionautics.com and used under Creative Commons Attribution Only 4.0 International License.